stories on the back of the exclusive that it had in relation to Sajid Javid waiving our opposition to the death penalty in the case of 2 former British citizens. Well, as part of the response to that, what our laws could do to make it ourselves more able to try these people properly, people are saying that the archaic treason law should be updated and used to prosecute jihadists who have fought in Syria. This is according to a former Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, the head of MI5, and a Lord Chief Justice have said. The Treason Act of 1351 has not been used since 1945. I think it was Lord Haw who fell under the Treason Act of 1945. But there are now calls for it to be revived to prosecute terrorists amid growing fears that British laws are not tough enough to deal with the returning jihadists. I said to you the other day, 90% of returning jihadists who come back to this country having fought in Syria and Iraq do not see the inside of a courtroom. That cannot be right, can it? We'll speak in a moment to Dr. Alan Mendoza, the Executive Director of the London-based counter-terrorism think tank, the Henry Jackson Society. But first, I spoke to the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Conservative MP for Tonbridge and Malling, Tom Tugendhat, who co-authored the report.
The law as it stands was written in 1351, and it was designed specifically to protect the person of the king, so Edward II, and to make sure that his children, his heirs, his sons, actually, to be frank, it was entirely male, his sons took over the kingdom. So it's geared for a type of treason, if you like, where the king and the state are the same thing. Now, clearly that's not true anymore, and we need to reflect the fact that the state is a reflection of the people, not of one monarch. And that's where the fundamental change in the law comes. Because actually what we're really talking about is how the law can be used to address areas where people have betrayed all of us. This is about people taking ideas and trying to split communities from one another, to pretend that there is such a thing as, real difference between communities, rather than recognize that we all have a duty one to the other. Yeah. And therefore that actually treason is an attack on all of us. And that's, these guys who are being sent to the States from Syria, they are, well, I suspect they are anyway, they should certainly be accused of treason and tried for treason, because what they're doing, they're not just weakening the state in the terms of bringing violence, they're spreading doubt between communities. They're allowing some people, to believe that actually, people like that, they were never British, really. And we've got to be very clear on this. Yes, they are. Yes, they were. And that's why we can try them for treason, because they have a duty too.
There would be some people who would suggest that if this is what they are doing is against British values, then don't you need to define more closely what British values are before you then try people of breaking them?
Well, I'm not defining, or rather coloured, not defining British values for that very purpose, that we're not actually arguing that it's a breach of British values. It's a breach of the duty that we owe to each other. And that duty is one that we get because we enjoy benefits. So look, if you are born in the UK, if you're a British citizen, then you have certain benefits, and some of those benefits are very obvious. They're things like, the healthcare and the education, and other things are less obvious, like the security, the ability to practice your religion freely, the sort of softer things, if you like. Now, whether or not you accept all of those is up to you. But what you can't do is work to undermine the rights of others to enjoy those. And that's what we mean by duty. And that's where the betrayal comes in. So look, if you decide you don't want to practice democracy, fine, don't vote. But if you work to actively undermine democracy, that's betrayal. If you want to practice your religion, fine, practice it. If you want to impose your religion through violent means, no, that's betrayal. It's a nuanced point.
Tom Tugendhat, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Conservative MP for Tonbridge and Malling, speaking to me a little bit earlier, 10 minutes past 9. Dr. Alan Mendoza is Executive Director of the London-based counter-terrorism think tank, the Henry Jackson Society. Do you think a change to the treason law would make it easier to prosecute people who have gone to fight for people like ISIL in Syria and Iraq? Good morning.
Well, good morning. Yes, I do believe that's the case. As you've just heard from Tom Tugendhat, the law dates from 1351. It's not fit for purpose for a modern day scenario. It relates to, obviously, issues that were relevant in the 14th century, not necessarily today. And, it's incumbent on any democratic state to update its laws and statutes to reflect the reality of the kinds of conflicts and the potential kinds of betrayal we face today.
So what is it specifically about the law currently that means it can't do what we need it to do to punish these people?
So in 2008, I believe, the former Attorney General, Lord Goldsmith, had a good look at the law. Obviously, we'd already come into contact with the potential for modern-day treason, if you like. And he believed that the scope, I think it was each element of the law, each sort of clause, was so unclear that it was very difficult to apply in a modern context. I mean, if you think about it for 1 second, the language of 1351 alone is very different to the language we speak today.
So it's a language shift rather than a shift in the focus of its meaning.
Well, I think it's probably both, actually, because as you heard earlier, when it's focused on the scope of the king's personage, and today, of course, we define our state not necessarily through an absolute monarchy, as it were, but through a democratic state. You also have to look at that purpose. You have both language and meaning, which need to be updated to reflect the Britain of 2018, not 1351.
It's interesting that the backing that this has already got. The former Home Secretary Amber Rudd seems to be for it. The Lord Judge, the former Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales, says if a citizen of this country chooses to fight with the Taliban in Afghanistan against British forces, his crime is more than terrorism. It is treason and should be prosecuted accordingly.
Well, yes, I think there's a wide-scale understanding that what we are seeing is not simply people fighting in conflicts or causing acts of terrorism around the world, but actually taking up arms, if you like, against the state that they are a citizen of and which they've had all the benefits of up to that point. I think that explains the widespread revulsion at what these people have done, and the explanation that was given earlier about the social compact and how, in a sense, you have responsibilities as well as rights, and if you breach those, you are guilty of a greater crime than simply one of violence. I think holds true, and that reflects the wide-scale support for this change.
What would happen, briefly and finally, Doctor, a foreign-born jihadist fights against British soldiers as part of a terrorist organisation? They are not, therefore, applicable under the new law of treason because they are not British. So you are making a greater crime than terrorism because a British subject is fighting against the British armed forces in a terrorist organisation.
That is correct. I think the line here, just as you mentioned, Lord Haw having been the last person to have been hung under the Treason Act, the reason he was hung under that act as opposed to just being kind of opposed was because he had taken up essentially verbal arms against the British state and was inciting others to do the same thing. So, we didn't, go out and hang every single German soldier. That wasn't the case. Those who were guilty of war crimes, one thing. So the question here is simply one of citizens turning citizens against each other and taking up arms against the state that they were members of, essentially. And that, is a greater crime, I think, and deserves a greater scrutiny than simply an act of terrorism.
Interesting. Doctor, thank you. Dr. Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of London-based counter-terrorism think tank, the Henry Jackson Society. It's interesting.